New Zealanders work a lot. Compared to many developed countries, full-time workers here log long hours each year, often longer than their counterparts in much of Europe. Employment rates are high, labour force participation is strong. By most conventional measures, New Zealanders are not underworking. And yet, New Zealand remains significantly poorer than many of the countries it compares itself to, including Australia, the United States, and much of Western Europe. So if the country works hard, why isn't it getting richer faster? The answer lies in a single metric: labour productivity. Labour productivity measures the amount of economic value produced per hour worked. If two workers both work 1 hour, but one produces $100 of value while the other produces $150, the second economy can afford higher wages, stronger public services, and higher living standards. In the long run, wages follow productivity. There is no sustained example of a high-wage economy with low productivity. Countries do not become wealthy by working more hours. They become wealthy by producing more per hour. For much of the late 20th century, productivity growth across advanced economies was steady. Technological progress, globalization, and capital deepening drove consistent increases in our output per hour. But in New Zealand, productivity growth has slowed significantly in recent years. Since around 2013, labour productivity growth has been weak, averaging well under 1% annually over much of the past decade. That may sound dramatic, but small differences compound. At 2% annual productivity growth, income doubles roughly every 35 years. At 0.5%, doubling takes more than a century. Over time, that divergence becomes structural, and it becomes visible in wage gaps. Today, output per hour worked in New Zealand sits well below that of Australia and the United States. In some small, high-performing economies, such as Ireland, Denmark, and Singapore, output per hour is dramatically higher. Ireland, for example, produces roughly twice as much per hour as New Zealand. That difference is not explained by effort. It is explained by structure. New Zealand is a small and geographically distant economy. Its domestic market is limited. Small markets constrain scale, and scale matters. Larger markets allow firms to specialize, invest in automation, spread fixed costs, and compete intensely. Small markets often produce smaller firms. Smaller firms tend to invest less in capital and research, and lower investment limits productivity growth. However, small size alone does not determine outcomes. Switzerland is small, Singapore is small, Denmark is small, Ireland is small. These countries compensate for scale through openness, integration into global markets, and high levels of capital investment. Small economies can be highly productive, but they must be structured to overcome their size. One of the strongest predictors of productivity is capital intensity, the amount of machinery, technology, and infrastructure available to each worker. When workers have better tools, they produce more per hour. A builder with advanced machinery can complete projects faster. A manufacturer with automated systems produces more output per shift. A software engineer with faster infrastructure and better systems develops products more efficiently. Across much of the OECD, higher capital per worker is closely correlated with higher productivity. New Zealand's capital investment per worker, however, has lagged behind many higher income economies. Lower capital intensity limits output per hour, and lower output per hour constrains wages. Investment drives productivity, productivity drives income. When investment slows, so does the growth in living standards. Every economy operates within a regulatory framework. Rules exist to protect safety, property rights, environmental standards, and market integrity. But regulation also introduces cost. Time is a cost, uncertainty is a cost, complexity is a cost. In New Zealand, major infrastructure and development projects often face lengthy approval processes. Housing developments can be delayed by extended consenting timelines. Energy and transport projects frequently require years to navigate regulatory pathways. When capital sits idle during prolonged approval processes, investment becomes riskier and more expensive. Large firms can often absorb those costs. Smaller firms may not. In a small economy where scale is already limited, regulatory friction can have disproportionate effects. Productivity rarely collapses suddenly. It erodes gradually through accumulated constraints. New Zealand invests heavily in education and training, but it also experiences significant outward migration of skilled workers. In many recent years, net long-term migration of New Zealand citizens has been negative. Higher wages and larger markets abroad, particularly in Australia, attract skilled professionals. When experienced engineers, healthcare professionals, researchers, and entrepreneurs leave, average productivity can decline. Human capital is unevenly distributed. A relatively small share of highly skilled workers can account for a large share of output and innovation. Replacing that talent is costly and in some cases difficult. Migration can bring new skills into the country, but persistent outward flows of experienced workers reduce the stock of human capital over time. New Zealand's economy has internationally competitive sectors, particularly in agriculture, food production, and tourism. These industries are efficient and globally integrated. However, many of them face natural scaling limits. Agricultural output is constrained by land availability. Tourism is constrained by capacity. Primary industries, while productive, may not scale in the same way as sectors built on intellectual property or advanced manufacturing. Highly productive economies have significant representation in scalable, high-value sectors, such as technology, pharmaceuticals, advanced manufacturing, and financial services. These industries benefit from network effects, intellectual property leverage, and global market reach. New Zealand has innovative firms, but relatively few grow to global scale while remaining headquartered domestically. Scale amplifies productivity. Without it, gains remain incremental. Productivity growth depends on sustained investment. Investment in machinery, in research and development, in digital infrastructure, in skills and training. But investment requires stable expectations, predictable rules, access to capital, confidence in long-term returns. When productivity growth slows, expected returns decline. When expected returns decline, investment slows further. This creates a feedback loop. In the absence of productivity growth, economies often rely on other drivers to expand total GDP. Population growth, higher labour force participation, longer working hours. These increase total output, but they do not sustainably increase output per person. Only productivity does that. Over short periods, productivity gaps appear modest. Over decades, they become decisive. A country growing productivity at 2% per year will see incomes rise rapidly over a generation. A country growing at 0.5% will experience much slower improvements in living standards. That divergence shapes wage differentials. It shapes fiscal capacity, it shapes infrastructure quality, and it shapes migration patterns. Once the gap opens, it is difficult to close, because higher productivity economies attract more capital, more talent, and more innovation, which further reinforces their advantage. New Zealand's challenge is not effort, it is structure. Working longer hours does not compensate for lower output per hour. Higher employment does not substitute for higher productivity. Over the long run, living standards rise when productivity rises. Without stronger productivity growth, wage growth remains constrained. Public services face tighter fiscal limits, and younger workers compare domestic opportunities with international ones. This is not a question of ideology. It is a function of arithmetic. Output per hour determines income per person. and income per person determines living standards. Productivity is not abstract. It is simply the relationship between effort and output. The same hour of work can generate different outcomes depending on capital, scale, skills, and institutional efficiency. When those factors align, output rises. When they do not, growth slows. For a small, open economy, the margin for structural inefficiency is narrow, and over time, the cumulative effects of small constraints become visible in large gaps. New Zealand works hard. The question is whether that system allows the effort to generate maximum value. Because in the long run, prosperity depends not on how long we work, but on how much we produce per hour. And that, ultimately, is arithmetic.